I'm Don Francis. I'm the coordinator here in Georgia for the U.S. Department of Energy Clean Cities Initiative. You've never heard of that before. Okay. Yeah. 25-year program by the federal government to say we need to do something about the fact that 90+% of our energy comes from one source, petroleum. And a lot of those people who sell us petroleum don't have our best interest in mind. So this program was started to help the country move away from petroleum as a single source. Now, we do, well, go back, I'm sorry, my error. Reduce petroleum, reduce greenhouse gases, that's lately been added to our program. And then, of course, the final thing is reducing the nation's dependency on imported petroleum in particular. Go to the next one. We are fuel agnostic. All I care about is you don't use petroleum. And I have solutions for you, whether it is electric or propane or natural gas or the biofuels, there is a solution. I tell folks there's not one perfect alternative fuel, but there is a perfect alternative fuel for your application. I'm going to spend most of the time talking about electric. I spent 30 years working for Georgia Power, half of that time in the electric transportation group, primarily focused on what's called infrastructure, the charging stations themselves. It's a crazy time for electric vehicles. I've been doing this for 25 years, and it was like, one of these days we're going to get there. We are there. And all of the manufacturers out there tell me they're going to build something with a plug immediately. Could be a plug-in hybrid, could be a battery electric, could be both. Some of the manufacturers, like Volvo, have said, we will never build another car that doesn't have a plug on it. Eventually, you will not even remember why you had a car that didn't have a plug on it. It'd be like picking up your smartphone, which I left on the table, and say, why did I have a flip phone? Why would I need that? Again, the story goes on and on and on. You just read the newspapers every day. There is another article about the fleet, the availability of vehicles changing dramatically. I want to talk a little bit about some of the technology because there's a lot of confusion about what's what. There are basically, 3 types of electric vehicles. Hybrid electric vehicle, you know that one really well. That's the Toyota Prius, been out there a very long time, a very good technology. There are applications where it makes the most sense. There are plug-in hybrids. The poster child for the plug-in hybrid is the Chevrolet Volt, V-O-L-T, not the Chevrolet Bolt, B-O-L-T. Plugs in, runs part-time on battery. When the battery's depleted, the engine starts running and runs like a hybrid. Really, really high fuel consumption. I know one of the guys in the room, Chris Campbell back there, had a Bolt. He would tell me he would go a whole year on 1 tank of gas. And he drove a lot because he knew exactly how to maximize the utilization. The battery electric vehicle, the poster child here is the Nissan Leaf. If you look at the 30,000+ electric vehicles registered in Georgia, 25,000 of them are Nissan Leafs. And there's a big reason why that is. And primarily, and you'll hear from Cornelius later, Nissan is all in. Their chief executive, Carlos Ghosn, has said, we're going to be building nothing but a battery electric vehicle in the future. Next one. Availability is way up. 2011, I bought my first Nissan Leaf. There were 6 vehicles available in the US, not all of them here in Georgia. We really only had 2 at the time. Today, there's more than 40, and that list grows. This list is not accurate because I made it today, because it changes every day. Every manufacturer out there, and my personal opinion is, if a manufacturer is not building a vehicle with a plug, they are the world's best buggy whip manufacturer. And they're soon going to be out of business. And I'll show you why in a little bit. Go to the next one. Curves are in the right direction. Every year, every month, we beat the previous year. We beat the previous month in sales. And you'll notice this little thing, because everybody kind of does things in December because of the tax credits. There's a federal tax credit for electric vehicles, too. So you see this drop off in January, then it picks back up, drops off every year, but the curve is that way. And that's the adoption rate. Next one. This is from Bloomberg. I've seen all kinds of charts here, but basically what this says is We're at 1% of the market today. By 2040, 54% of the vehicles sold will have a plug on them. I've also seen a chart done by a guy named Tony Seba, who has a book out called Disruptive Clean Technologies. He says this is not a 25-year event, it's a 10-year event. 10 years from now, it'll be like the smartphone. 10 years ago, you didn't have one. Now, if you leave the house without it, you'll turn around and go back and get it because you can't get through the day without it in your hand. I've started noticing people carry it around like this. I at least put it in my pocket. And there's a reason why this is going to happen. Let's go to the next one. Costs are dropping dramatically. 1998, EV1. I drove an EV1 at Georgia Power for 4, 5, 6 years. $500 a kilowatt hour. The joke used to be, how did you get cheap batteries? You buy the car and throw the car away because the car costs less than the batteries did because they were being sold at a loss. Today, you get out to 2018, the Model 3, there's a Tesla Model 3 out there. It is right now the lowest cost per kilowatt hour of battery pack, but the Bolt is right there, the Nissan Leaf is right there, and that price continues to go down. Let's go to the next slide. This one is really interesting. Cost per kilowatt hour in a battery pack. We are obviously out here 2016, 17, 18, still a little over $100 a kilowatt hour. Two lines there. Affordable EV, economy EV. Look at that green line out there about 2023. You will go into the dealership in 2023 and there'll be 2 cars on the floor. They cost exactly the same. One's gasoline, one's battery electric. The gasoline's only advantage is it goes a little bit further and it fills up quicker. The electric vehicle goes 200, 300 miles on a charge, maybe takes 30, 40 minutes to recharge, costs you 10 cents, it costs you 1/10 the operating cost of the gasoline vehicle. So you will only buy a gasoline vehicle if you need to drive long distances and fuel quickly. If you drive back and forth to work every day, park at home, park at work, maybe there's charging at work, you won't even consider a gasoline vehicle because you don't need it. And it's cheaper to get the electric. That's what they call the crossover point, and that's when things really take off. Because the electric will be cheaper to buy, cheaper to operate. It just has one disadvantage. It takes a little bit longer to refuel it than a gasoline vehicle. Next one. We're concentrated right now in certain parts of the country. Atlanta and Georgia did really, really well because we had a very nice incentive, a $5,000 state income tax credit, in addition to the $7,500 federal income tax credit. Unfortunately, this is the editorial part, our short-sighted legislature did away with that tax credit in 2015, and it's costing the state of Georgia millions of dollars a year in revenue. I can get into that with you one-on-one. Just know that your legislature has driven up the cost to the state by eliminating this tax credit. The other things you see is primarily the concentrations in California because they have state incentives, they have local incentives that help drive down that cost to where that cost is now very cost competitive compared to gasoline. In Georgia, no surprise here, the cars are concentrated in 5 places. 90% of the cars registered in Georgia with a plug are in those 5 locations. If you look at just the metro counties, Cobb, DeKalb, Fulton, Cherokee, 80% of the vehicles that are in Georgia are registered in those 5 counties. And again, the demographics are right. The commuting is right. And we drive a lot of miles and you save a lot of money because you're using electric instead of gasoline. Next one. I want to talk a little bit about the buzzwords here, the technology on charging. It's the next key critical issue. I said, okay, I got the car, now what do I do? We have 3 levels of AC charging, and there's actually 3 levels of DC charging. Level 1 is 120 volt, 15 amp outlet. You got one in your garage, you can plug it in, the cord that you need comes with the car, plug it in, charge it up overnight. My neighbors, I live in DeKalb County over in the Toco Hills area, my neighbor next door worked at Emory, He just charged his car this way, and I asked him a lot of times, why just that? Because I have a 240-volt charger in my garage. He said, well, I'm 5 miles from Emory, so I go 5 miles over, 5 miles back, 10 miles a day. That would take him maybe 2 hours to charge at 110 volts. There's no reason to spend any more money if you're a low utilization. Level 2 goes up to 100 amps. Think of, like a dryer outlet or a range outlet, that kind of amperage and that kind of voltage. Charges the car at the rate of about 25 miles per hour. The average car in Atlanta is driven 40 miles a day. That means a little over 2 hours to charge their car every night. The utilities, I'm a Georgia Power TOU time of use customer. I know Cobb EMC is working on their own electric rates for EV owners to incentivize us to charge off-peak at night. Why? People say we're going to overload the grid. No. EPRI, Electric Power Research Institute, they're the R&D arm of the utility industry, has said we can charge 200 million cars in the United States today with the existing infrastructure if we control when they charge. Can charge the car at night. Right now, it's up to me to program the car to charge at night. Eventually, you'll turn that over to the utility and smart meters, and they'll tell you, well, we're going to turn your charger on, and it'll be ready at 7 o'clock in the morning, but we'll determine when we're going to turn that charger on. So we'll control that load. You control that load, then you spread that those amperages over a lot of hours. It's good for the utility. It's good for you. It is really a no-brainer. And we are very lucky, and it was talked about already, the Georgia infrastructure is really robust. But what has happened here over the years with folks like here at Cobb EMC and the other EMCs in the metro area and Georgia Power and TVA, our infrastructure is in good shape. I'm not worried about that at all. You can charge at home, charge in the public. You got to charge one of two places. Your car sits 22 hours a day somewhere, either at your home or at your workplace. You really only need to charge in one of those two locations, maybe once a day, maybe not once a day. My wife and I, all we have is electric vehicles. We're now totally gasoline-free. She charges her car about once a week. And one of us have to remember to go out and plug her car in because she only does about 100 miles a week. I charge my car 2-3 times a week because I do a lot more miles. But even with the lower mileage electric vehicles, if you can charge at work or at home, it'll work. There is no scenario. I tell people, if you drive less than 50 miles a day, there is no scenario where an electric vehicle will not work for you with the current level of technology. Next one. We are expanding rapidly the amount of EV infrastructure, places to charge. Not only spread all over the community, like here, there are chargers back here, and there's chargers out front. I've used the ones out front in the past, but they're all over the place. They're at the malls, they're at the dealerships. What we're working on right now is the corridors, so that you can drive to Savannah, that you can drive to Chattanooga, that you can drive to Charlotte, or Montgomery, or Birmingham, or wherever. And every 50 miles on the interstate, there is a place to charge the car with a DC fast charger. It means that's a 15, 20-minute event. And then depending upon what you're going to be doing, one of the stations I use is behind a Starbucks at Tifton. By the time I get out of the car, get my Frappuccino, get back to the car's ready to go. It's waiting on me. I'm not waiting on it. I drove to Savannah already. My car will make it all the way to Savannah. I still had to stop in Dublin, not because the car needed to, because I had to. I can't go as far as the car can go. So, take the issue of range anxiety off the plate. It doesn't exist anymore. Go to the next one. Example. If I put up all of the stations, these are just the fast chargers, you wouldn't be able to see anything because it'd be a sea of dots. There's 672 locations with some kind of a charger, and most of them have more than one. That's why there's almost 1,900 charging cord sets. Right now, and I counted them today, because that number changes every day, There's 111 locations where there's a fast charger. There's more than one connector at these locations. So, and you can just look here at the numbers that are around this location right here, from the locations around the battery, around the new ballpark, up and down the interstates, at the dealerships, at the malls. All of them have DC fast chargers. Barriers. We had an issue here in Georgia. We've overcome some of those issues, not all of them. Availability of charging stations. We've been focusing for the last 10 years on installing charging stations, and we are still at it. And there are companies out there with support from folks like Nissan. You're going to hear from Cornelius here in a minute, but also support from BMW, from national companies, from the federal government, from the state government to put in charging stations. So that level of availability continues to go up rapidly. Also from your utilities. They're also supporting the installation of these stations. Capital cost. We're driving cost out of the installation. The first installations we did were probably $75,000 for a DC fast charger, not $75,000 today. Lack of charging standards. This is probably the biggest deterrent to mass adoption, is we have 3 different DC fast charge connections. CHAdeMO, and it is a Japanese acronym for stopping for a cup of tea, because that's how long you need to stop to charge the car. They developed their own standard, and it's primarily used on Japanese cars and cars in China. SAE, Society of Automotive Engineers, has a standard. I used to work for General Motors before I went to work for Georgia Power, and they have a big issue. It's called NIH, not invented here. The head of the committee is a GM employee, and he said, I don't care what the Japanese have done, we're going to do our own thing. And so there is an SAE standard for fast charging. It is used by the US manufacturers and the European manufacturers. It looks like SAE is the winner from what I am seeing every day, and the adoption rate that's going on with what's called the SAE combo connector. And then, of course, our friends at Tesla did their own thing. They had a couple of reasons to do that. One is they give away a lot of free charging, so they wanted only their cars to use their stations. As an owner, I also get a little adapter that lets me plug my car into everybody else's stations. But nobody could use their stations unless you have one of their cars. Today in the US, almost 18,000 places to charge your car, nearly 50,000 cords at those 18,000 locations. Here in Georgia, and I didn't update this slide, the other slide was more updated so that those numbers continue to grow. But here's the one challenge for us in Atlanta. We estimate that by 2030, the Department of Energy believes there will be 225,000 plug-in electric vehicles operating in the metro area. We need 6,000 charging station locations. We don't have that many today. We got a lot of work to do. But we know what the target is. We know how we're going to get there. People ask about emissions. Well, you're just using that dirty coal-fired plant. We talked about renewables today. The electric vehicle is the only vehicle out there that can use renewable energy. And the larger the renewable energy component gets, the better the car gets. I updated that slide. The last one I'd seen was about 60 miles per gallon. Today, on a nationwide basis, if your vehicle doesn't get 80 miles per gallon, you are dirtier than a gasoline vehicle or electric vehicle, even though it's running on a coal-fired plant. It varies across the country. Today, here in the Southeast, we're about 56 miles per gallon. So if your car is not getting more than 56 miles per gallon, I am cleaner than you. I'm also a lot cheaper than you. And this is going to get better and better and better because the number of coal-fired plants continues to go like this. The number of natural gas plants go like this. Nuclear is coming on board. Nuclear is really great when you look at greenhouse gas emissions because there are none. And it's a 50-year asset. It's going to be out there doing something forever. Again, and the renewables. Solar and electric vehicles go together perfectly. You get a better return on investment if you have an electric vehicle that your solar panels are charging, because instead of buying $3 a gallon gasoline, you're getting free electricity. Go to the next one. Emissions, if you look at greenhouse gas, we always talk about this, even with today's mix of plants, we're half the greenhouse gases emissions of a gasoline vehicle. If you look at what are called criteria pollutants, nitrous oxides, smog, and Atlanta's been the poster child for non-attainment for years. We're a 90% reduction, even with the current plants we have. Go to the next one. A lot of data, throwing a lot of stuff out there. It was mentioned in the last presentation about NREL, National Renewable Energy Lab. We have available through what's called the Alternative Fuel Data Center access to models, cost analyzers. You can go in there and say, I'm thinking about buying a new car. Let me compare the car I usually buy with a Toyota Prius, with a Chevrolet Volt, with a Chevrolet Bolt, a Nissan Leaf, and you can do a cost comparison. You put in your miles, you put in what you're paying for fuel, and it will tell you what's the best pick for you based on your situation. Great location. There's other things up here, what's called the station locator down in the corner, Alternative Fuel Data Center. That's AFDC. Google AFDC, you can find it. You can then look and see where the stations are around you. You'll be surprised how many electric vehicle charging stations are around you. We have a goal. We're working on a project in the Buckhead area where no one will be more than about 250 yards from a charging station. City of Atlanta just passed an ordinance which says all new construction must be PEV ready for 20% of the spaces. So this is going on very rapidly right now. Here's the sources. Last slide. This is me. This is how to find me, cleancitiesgeorgia.org. If you can find me there, you can find links to a lot of this information. We talked about electric vehicles, but if you're in fleet operations, I'd love to talk to you about using propane or natural gas, which you see all over the city today. And now we'll move over to Cornelius. Oh, I forgot. And Cornelius reminded me about this. With our association with Nissan, in Georgia now, we have a $3,000 rebate on a new Nissan Leaf, available through Clean Cities Georgia. You have to be what's called a stakeholder. A stakeholder of Clean Cities Atlanta is somebody that lives in Georgia. If you live in Georgia, you're eligible for this $3,000 rebate, and it's at time of sale. The dealer will, and I did one last year, figures up what you owe, takes $3,000 off of that. And in addition to that, down the road, when you file your tax return, you're qualified for up to a $7,500 income tax credit. So he'll show you the price of the vehicle, take $10,000 off of that. That's what it'll cost you. Now, here's my brother from another mother. He and I do this a lot.
Hi there. Thanks, Don. I'm Cornelius Willingham. I'm with Nissan North America. I think the current title is Fleet Business Development Manager, but EV Strategy Operations Manager. And my task is really to be Johnny Appleseed for electric vehicles. I'm a retired auto dealer. I sold my business several years ago and decided I would play golf, but unfortunately having good clubs is not enough. So what I did, a friend of mine called me and said, we're trying to make the leap between the techies who understand electric vehicles and the general public. And you have retail experience and you have factory experience. I'd worked for Ford Motor Company. And so they asked me to come back. And so now I go around the country and I basically talk about electric vehicles, what's going to come in the future, and basically why electric vehicles make sense for quite a few of you in this room. I think are you playing? Okay, so I'll do that now. First thing I like to start is what the experts say. Electric vehicles are coming. If you think that this is a technology that is going to be here in 5 years or 10 years, it's here right now, and it will serve the needs of most of you right now. Take a look at what UBS says. It's going to be disruptive to gasoline within the next 10 years. University of Berkeley says that it's going to be 64% of the vehicles sold out there by 2030. And OPEC, who long, of the bastion of environmental causes, They actually upped their forecast of electric vehicle sales by 500%. They believe there'll be 266 million of them sold by 2030. There are about 3 million right now. Electric vehicle sales are exploding, and the number of models out there is exploding also. Back in 2011, when the Nissan Leaf was introduced, there were really just two. We were out there along with Tesla at two different ends of the marketplace. Today, when we introduce the 18, which is our third generation electric vehicle, there are about 18 models, and there'll be 37 by 23. Let me tell you why this is happening. You've all seen charts of what's happening globally. Right now, the Earth is the hottest it's been in 115,000 years. 16 of the 17 hottest years on record have occurred since the year 2000. And I don't know if you looked in the paper last week, about a week ago, Europe recorded the hottest day it's ever had. I think Europe's been around a while. And I would say that when something like that happens, maybe it's not a fluke. One of the reasons that we believe it's getting warmer is because the concentrations of carbon. Right now, we put about 40 billion tons of carbon by human action into the atmosphere every year. This is a chart, this is a chart of CO2 concentrations going back in thousands of years, along with global temperatures, along with sea levels. You can see that they very, very closely mirror each other, but take a look down in really the last 2 or 3 years, and you can see where CO2 concentrations, they reached 411 parts per million about a year ago, after historically being somewhere around under 200 parts per million. You can see the response that the Earth has had in the past in both sea level and global temperature. So this gives us some reason to have caution. Now, Atlanta. Atlanta has the fourth worst traffic in the nation. I know that when you're sitting on the connector, you might think that you're number one, but it's actually number 4. 15 counties are below the standard for attainment in air quality and particulate matter. Hopefully we don't get to the area, to the level of China where they're saying they lose 1,500 people a day. And they have suggested for the elderly and for children, they should not breathe the air. Now, they don't actually explain what the alternative is, but they at least have done their part, which is they've given you the warning. When you replace a single gas-powered vehicle with an electric vehicle, you save 6 to 9 tons of CO2 from going into the air. Just one. So think of a fleet vehicle, a security vehicle, riding around in a parking lot. Think of a commuter going back and forth to work. One. And given the growth level of Atlanta and the number of people who are moving to town, if you can match the growth in Atlanta with the number of electric vehicles that are sold, at least you can tread water. You know, I've always been told when you're in a hole, find yourself in a hole, stop digging. That's what we're asking people to do in basically showing good citizenship by considering an electric vehicle rather than a gas-powered vehicle. Nissan obviously sells both, but our CEO is committed to 2 things: committed to zero emissions and committed to zero fatalities. And we're going to add the technology that's going to allow us to do both of those. Now, this gives you a pretty good idea what 1 gallon of gasoline produces in terms of CO2. And you can also take a look at where we have a chance to make a difference. You really can't make a difference in industry in terms of reducing CO2. It can be done by mandate, but we basically have industrial output that gives jobs, and it makes it really tough to cut back on that. But transportation is the variable. And we have the opportunity through a conversion from gasoline engines to electric vehicles to reduce the amount of carbon we put into the air. Here's one of the big myths that's out there, and that is that electric vehicles are designed for people who don't drive very much. It could not be further from the truth. Electric vehicles, as a general rule, suit those people who drive under 50 miles a day. And if you look at a chart of both Leaf drivers and all drivers, you'll see that most Leaf owners drive between 21 and 30 miles or 31 and 50 miles per day. And those are the people who normally commute. When you go and you look at the numbers, and the National Highway Transportation Study, which looked at 749,000 individual trips, found that only 1% of the trips that you take exceed 70 miles, and 95% of the trips that you take are below 30 miles. That means that an electric vehicle with a range of 150 to 200 miles is more than sufficient to handle your everyday needs. Now, you look at some of the other demographics. Most people who drive electric vehicles are married. They already have their minivan / family hauler at home. When they go on vacation, they've got that vehicle for a long trip. They need a vehicle to go to work. They need a vehicle to get around. And as a general rule, an electric vehicle will do that job more efficiently than a gas-powered vehicle will. It will do it at 80 to 90% lower cost. It has a reliability rate that in the UK has been measured at 25 times the reliability of a gas-powered vehicle. And it puts out zero emissions, 6 to 9 tons less CO2. Click. I always think of this, and I did work for Ford, even though I would now work for Nissan. Henry Ford, when asked about building a car, most people would have said they wanted a faster horse. We had this problem already, and it's really kind of interesting that every time we make a conversion, there are those people who basically try to hold the dam back. The reality is that when the horse came along, it produced a problem in the United States. In Manhattan, there were about 440,000 horses that were in the New York area. And I don't know if you know much about horses, but they have an emissions problem. It's about 35 pounds a day. 400,000 times 35 pounds a day times a month, you can see where that could be a problem. And there was a belief that that this was a problem that could not be overcome. There was no other answer until the automobile showed up. And within 10 years, there were only 20,000 horses in New York, and the automobile had completely replaced the horse. We're now in a position where electric vehicles have an opportunity to replace gas-powered vehicles. And I'm going to flip one more, and here's why. If you look at a concept vehicle, you ever go to the auto show and see a concept vehicle sitting there and say, wow, that'd be great, we ought to build that. If you are CEO of an auto company, it will take you 5 years to take that vehicle from that design to the street. By the time you can get suppliers in place, production in place, all the things that are necessary, it will take you at least 5 years to get that on into the street. Take a look at this chart on battery prices, and I think Don mentioned it a little bit earlier. Around, say, 2025, 2026, it will cost less to build an electric vehicle than it will to build a gas-powered vehicle. Now, let's assume you're in 2020 or 2021 and you're CEO of an auto company, and you want to put a new vehicle on the market. Are you going to doom yourself to a competitive disadvantage price-wise in that construction? Or are you going to take the most efficient, lowest cost powertrain that you possibly can? the one that doesn't pollute, the one that costs less to operate. That's the most likely thing to happen. So I think Don is right and Tony Seba is right. You're going to see this happen a lot quicker than you think it's going to happen. We are the last generation that's going to ever have to give up driving. My mother gave up driving when she was 92. None of you will have to. There'll come a point where your car will drive itself, and it will be an electric car. And you will call it with your smartphone, and it will come from its parking space, and it will come get you, and it will take you where you want to go, and go park itself and wait for you to come back. The reason that's going to happen is because of math. It costs a lot less to drive an electric car. When you talk about spending 10 cents on the dollar, go to the DOE numbers. The DOE numbers say that the average automobile in America is 11.4 years of age, has 150,000 miles on it, and basically costs $353 to keep on the road, fuel, maintenance, and repair. Not including payment, just fuel, maintenance, and repair. There's going to be a transmission, there's going to be a water pump, there's going to be a thermostat, there's going to be a fuel sending unit, there's going to be spark plug, there's going to be oil changes. There's going to be costs, none of which exist on an electric vehicle. That means that even if you look at something as economical as, say, a Chevy Cruze or even a Chevy Volt, a Leaf, a 100% electric vehicle costs significantly less to keep on the road. Now, we win all types of awards. I'm going to skip through this part because I know that we're going to be asking some questions later. We won innovation awards. This is the part I think is going to be very interesting for you. Because we're dealing with electric vehicles, we have the ability to do a lot more with electronics. And one of the things we can do is we can bring driver assist technology that's going to save your life. Automatic emergency braking on a Nissan Leaf in the 18 model is standard on all models. That means that the vehicle will attempt to stop if you fail to. Or if a collision is unavoidable, try to mitigate that collision by applying the brakes. We have things like ProPilot, which will center you in the lane and will correct so that you stay straight. Or intelligent cruise, which will pace with the car in front of you, and if that car applies its brakes, it will apply the brakes, and then will accelerate back to speed when it accelerates. I've done that on the connector in Atlanta. It's a very interesting thing to just kind of sit there and let the car drive itself. Now, we call this driver assist technology because now you're managing your drive. And that's where we get to the zero fatality number. McKinsey did a study that says that if we do this right, 90% of auto fatalities can be eliminated. Now, one of the things remember I said battery prices were falling and they've fallen 80% in the last 5 years? Well, we had a choice. We can reduce the price of a car. The reality is that nobody ever wants to do that. I think it's bad business to do that. But we can add value. So what we've done on every vehicle that we have is we've added about $5,000 in additional value, plus we've reduced the price of those vehicles. Click the second one. We did it on the SV by reducing it by $1,700 and adding $5,000 worth of driver assist technology. And even on the SL, we reduced it $590 and added $6,700 in additional technology. And we're going to continue to do that and use Leaf as a test bed for all of our new technology. Not only do we change the styling, we added additional range. The studies that we've seen say 153 is the number. If you look at all the people out there who drive, if we want to handle 90% of the population and reach 90% of the population, we need 153 miles of range. With DC fast charging, where you can get 50 miles in 10 minutes, there's a little need beyond that. When people buy an electric vehicle, a lot of people charge up every day. But after they've had it about a month and a half, they're charging up 2 to 3 times a week. Don's wife charges once a week. Now, there are a lot of vehicles out there, and there are going to be vehicles, and we think that we can compete very, very well with all of them. But when you look at what Kelley Blue Book says, the big issue is cost of ownership over 5 years. And that's one of the things that we won an award for. We have a lot of things that we think make a difference with this vehicle, but I think the intelligent mobility piece is going to be the key to it. Now, I did drop this in, and I think Don touched on it, so I'm not going to touch on it again. I think they wanted us all to come up here after the fact. Do you want to do that now? Then we'll answer questions. I'm sure we probably touched on something that interests you.